Hi, everybody can hear me. So welcome to this breakout session of growing champions in new sectors. It's gonna be kind of a smaller crowd, so if everybody wants to move up, that might make it a little more intimate, easier to hear, easier to ask questions. They wanted me to ask you guys to do that. Just to be honest. I am Monica Potts. I'm a journalist and nonfiction writer. I grew up in rural Clinton, Arkansas. I think about rural issues a lot. I still am a proud rural American, like like the other folks on our stage today. I live in rural central New York, closer to Canada than New York City. And we're gonna talk today to farmers, rural advocates, and faith community leaders who are expanding, who we think about as beneficiaries of guaranteed income, expanding it so that it's not just a partisan or urban idea as it's often thought of, but we understand that it's welcome in all other kinds of areas. They're already working in rural areas, they're already advocating in rural areas, they're overcoming skepticism and bringing new people into the tent, and so hopefully we can all learn from what they're doing and take strategies away from today to learn about how to apply them to our own work here. So first, to my left, we have Joe Tolbert, who is a proud Appalachian, or Afro-Latin, and he's an organizer, executive, minister, and cultural strategist whose work sits at the intersection of art, culture, spirituality, and social justice. And he's executive director of the Waymakers Collective in Knoxville, Tennessee. So welcome to Joe. Next up, we have Travis Helmondollar. Is that right? Yeah. And Chief Executive Officer of Case WV. It's a nonprofit that works in 14 counties in West Virginia. And they work on senior programs, Head Start, early Head Start, recovery services, and other kinds of social programs. And at the end, we have Phil O'Leary, who is part of the Wisconsin Farmers Union. He's a founding member of the Wisconsin Rural Property Prosperity Task Force. And he and others from Wisconsin agencies, nonprofits, university extension programs, and local organizations are developing strategies for evaluating and implementing guaranteed incomes and programs in rural communities. So I'm so excited to talk to everyone today, and I hope you all are excited to hear from them. So the first question I wanted to ask is, I think we've talked about it a little bit already, and we heard some of the first programs in guaranteed income were in cities. It's often thought of as an urban idea or only for progressives, self-identified progressives. But all of you come from a community that complicates that framing. And so I wanted to start with Joe, and what was the entry point for cash in your world, and what does it take to bring new champions into the space?
Yeah, hello everyone. As Monica mentioned, my name is Joe Tolbert, Executive Director of the Waymakers Collective, which is a community-controlled arts and culture fund that serves artists and cultural workers in Central Appalachia. And for me, Appalachia as a whole, in Central Appalachia in particular, is often forgotten about. A lot of people in the philanthropic world has called it the Forgotten South. And so because of that, I feel like a lot of the communities in which our members live and work have had to iterate, their own practices for survival. And so for us, it's how can we amplify the things that are already happening and also add to it by saying there's this other thing that we're doing that could benefit the artists and cultural workers in those communities. And so I'll talk about it a little later on, but we first started doing this work after the 2022 floods. It was called a 300-year flood, and it crossed state lines, and a lot of our artists were first responders in that. And so I'll go into that a little bit more, but that was the first entry point. But I think it starts with acknowledging the things that people have done to continue to live and thrive in their communities.
Yeah. And for Travis, what are you seeing in West Virginia?
I think partnerships are incredibly critical, and building partnerships from the ground up, and you can't have good partnerships without solid level of trust. Trust in rural communities is absolutely critical, and you can only do that. A telephone conversation is not going to cut it. An email is not going to work. but a handshake, face-to-face, eye-to-eye interaction is what has worked best for us. Sitting down at the table, sharing a cup of coffee, sharing a meal. It's rural Appalachia culture, and it's understanding that if we get to know each other, we can probably work together on just about anything. And by the way, it's understanding that, the old saying, we can smell a fake. So it's being genuine, being authentic, and building those healthy relationships from day one.
Mm-hmm. And Phil, how about you in your work?
So I'm involved in a project in Wisconsin. It's in an area that's above Madison, if you know Wisconsin geography at all. It's 4 counties, and the concept of guaranteed income is a new concept there. And we had a committee that we put together, and I'll talk about how it's really important to put together a committee carefully a little bit later. But one of the things that we felt has helped us in our success in putting this project together is that we came up with to answer the why. Why is the answer the why question. And we did that by having a consensus process where we put together 4 pillars that really reflect rural values. And I agree with your concept on values. And in the 4 pillars were economic stability and resilience. And the second was family autonomy. The third was community connections and community pride. And the 4th was thriving rural communities. And I'm going to just read one of these to you so that you can get a flavor as to how we worked on the language too. People should be under the family autonomy. People should be empowered to be able to pursue their own goals, care for their home, their families, and plan for the future on their own terms and maintain their independence. And by doing this, we found that as we developed our program, we had consensus. It made it easier to make consensus later because we spent a lot of time putting together the pillars. And oftentimes, I think organizations kind of skip this stuff and think, well, we just got to start planning. And we used a process where we had 80% consensus within our committee. Mm-hmm. And we found that really worked.
Yeah, what I find interesting about all of these answers is that we're talking about something new with guaranteed income, but we're also still talking about some old things, meeting people face to face, sitting down with coffee, building relationships, building consensus. All of those things, they're things we know we need to do. It's not surprising, but it's in the context of this new program. But I wanted to ask, rural economies are transitioning. They've been transitioning for decades now. And now we have AI entering the picture, which is complicating things for a lot of people, or making people nervous about the future as well. And so in that context, how does guaranteed income enter the conversation? Do people feel like it's kind of there to soften the blow, or do they think about it as enabling new futures, enabling next steps? Do you want to start, Joe?
Yeah, Appalachia is a region that's been heavily extracted from, and when you think about the shift from coal to hopefully more green futures, right? That leaves a lot of people in dire straits. And so when we think about artists and cultural workers, that impact is felt more deeply because of the way our cultural economies are situated on the coast, West Coast, East Coast, and more major cities. A lot of the folks in regions like Appalachia get left out. And so for us, even as we are a community-controlled arts intermediary, we've seen that when people don't have to worry about their basic needs, that the creativity and the imagining and the dreaming can be bolstered in ways that aren't when you're trying to piece together things to live. And so for us, it's about how can we, one, support people without, all of the hoops that funders and grant makers make a lot of their grantees jump through, but it's also how can we alleviate the arts being a luxury for those who can afford it, and see it as a human right, as air, clean water, and all of those things, by just giving people what they need so that they can focus on their craft, which also pours back into the community, because again, those artists and cultural workers were a lot of the first responders because they knew the community, they knew the people in the community, and so
ready, and then all of a sudden they tell you, oh, we're out. And then you say, okay, so we have to pivot, we have to figure something out. And so what's the obvious choice? You pick another flavor. And then you pick another flavor, and then you taste it, you're taking a risk. Do I like this flavor? Is it sweet enough? Is it exactly the components that I want? Is it a healthy version or a not healthy version? Does it melt too fast? And then what happens when they look over at you and say, oh, by the way, we're out of that one too? And pretty soon you have this downhill spiral that causes a ripple effect that's really detrimental. Cash brings a stability factor. And what I think is really important is that when you have that stability, when you can use something to leverage into the next decision-making process, it's in those moments that people can have the mental health improvements, access to community resources, they can think more clearly, and setting a new precedence for not only themselves, but for generations to come.
Yeah. Phil?
So I think cash provides the ability for families to just better manage their own affairs. You know, people in rural communities really value independence, calling their own shots. The program we propose to put together would provide cash for uncompensated caregivers. And I'll go into later about how we got to that point, but think of someone taking care of an elderly neighbor or a parent that person has less capacity to work, couldn't maybe take some overtime because they now have to help with the things. And each of those makes the situation more difficult for that family or for the neighbor helping someone in the neighborhood, like we heard about first thing this morning. And I think probably all of you in your family have had times when you've had to help an elderly person. I think the real benefit of this program, then you want to start talking about, well, what are the benefits to the community? And the one that I'm citing in on is that if we can keep the elderly in their homes and in the community instead of having them go to another place, first of all, it will save a ton of money. And second, the quality of life will be much higher. And third, in the geography that we're in, going to someplace might be 30 or 40 miles away. It's like sending them off to solitary confinement. And so these kinds of things, if we'll see how it works, but that's what we're trying to improve the community by doing.
Yeah, one thing I think I heard from you all is how enabling cash can be, that you are freed from worry, you're freed from just paying the bills and trying to scrape and get ahead, and how draining that can be. And once you have the freedom to not worry about that anymore, you can build on it, and you can do the work you're already doing, like caregiving work. You can do the work you're already doing to take care of your family, or to build art, or preserve your local art, histories. And I think that's like super important. I think it's one thing we don't hear enough about in conversations about what money and what a lack of it does to people. It drains the ability to be creative and thoughtful and caring a lot. So I do want to ask, as someone who's lived in rural communities and knows what it can be like to introduce a new idea to some of those communities, what was it like to build support, on the ground for cash in these rural communities, in faith communities, in Appalachian communities? What worked and what failed, and what surprised you when you were trying to reach out to people and building support for this? Maybe we want to start from the other end now. Do you want to start, Phil?
Okay. Well, the starting point for us was to reach out to thought leaders in the community area that we'd identified. And this community area, as I mentioned, is in the central part of Wisconsin. I don't live there, so I didn't know much about it. And and the other person that led this action is Blake, so Blake needs to raise her hand here. Higher, Blake, much higher. But Blake had experience with the Madison, Wisconsin program and had been working with the University of Wisconsin evaluating that. And so building upon that experience, she and I then started talking to people. And we talked to a lot of people. We think about 40. And these were community leaders, different health organization, business leaders. We'd ask them, who else should we talk to? And we just kept working at it. And as we did that, it was like you kept going to another layer of depth. And that really helped. And when we got done, we identified 8 people that we wanted to have join our committee. And then Blake and I and another person from the university that has helped with the research aspect of this. And we had a really strong committee. And I think rushing setting up the committee is something you need to be really careful about. The second thing is we had some financial support for the committee and also for the leadership's activities, and that really helped too. So we had some resources, and we had a focus committee. These were one-on-one conversations that we had. You cannot rush this project, this part of the project. Now what we're doing, we've identified the program that we'd like to move ahead with, and we're in the process of having one-on-one conversations in the community, going back to leaders again, describing the proposal, all in an effort to start to initiate fundraising. But we know fundraising in the community is going to be very difficult. We're also going to have to go outside the community for fundraising.
Yeah. And Travis, how about you?
For me, the start was very slow. I had received multiple emails from Give Directly regarding the RISE GMI project for Mercer County, West Virginia, and I promptly ignored them. And because if it is too good to be true, it just may be not true. So I had ignored the emails, I had ignored a telephone call, but thankfully they were adamant and they kept on, and I was very thankful then, truly, to be involved. Case, West Virginia, and I personally were very proud to be involved in this project, and so glad that continued. I think one of the highlights here is the importance of learning the community that you're going to be in on a very personal, intimate, detailed level. You cannot go into the community and think you know the community. You cannot go into the community and just look at quantitative data and think you know the community. You can't go in and just have a conversation with one person and think you know the community. So what I'm really thankful that happened with this project is the team came in and really took the time to think through it, to systematically learn the community on a very intimate level, learning the community partners, learning the individuals, learning the economy, learning the healthcare system, the school system, learning all the pieces, and really diving in and making sure that all the pieces of the planning process, even from day one, so that the project had greatest possible impact. And I'll give you an example. One of the greatest pieces or outcomes of that process was the project that has 3 parameters. You have to be, of course, a citizen live in Mercer County. You have to 2, be an adult, and 3, we had to reach that, what was originally the poverty level guidelines and the federal poverty level. And through conversations with community partners and individuals and families, we're looking at how do we have greatest impact on the entire sector, the entire target, and coupling their parameters with the demographics that we're already working with, increased that to 200% poverty level, which made incredible sense for our community. It made perfect sense to target and allow access to the working poor for those individuals, to make sure that we're reaching all those people who really could use the funds and leverage it for long-term success, widely successful. So I'm very, very thankful for that. And then so many people, once they receive that, once they understand, we want to get to know the community, then they want to partner with it. So it's a huge educational component there as well.
I think we all know that if you go into any community, but probably especially rural communities, and think you know what's going on, they'll tell you when you don't. Yeah. And how about you in Tennessee?
Yeah, so I'm gonna take y'all on a little journey. So, the Waymakers Collective came out of the sunsetting of Art Place America, which was this multi-grouped pooled fund that wanted to fund creative placemaking. And so they knew that when they started in 2020, they would shut their doors. And so in 2019, they launched a program called Local Control Local Fields. And that was basically where across 5 geographies in the US, and Appalachia was one of them, they hired facilitators to guide people through the creation of something. And so they hired facilitators from our region, and throughout 2019, they guided us through a process that helped us answer the 3 questions before the money could be transferred. And those were, how are we gonna govern? Where's the money gonna be housed, and what are we gonna fund? And so it took from spring 2019 to January of 2020 to really decide that. And we knew that we wanted community control to be a core component of that. And so people threw out things like an arts and culture union, a this and a that. And once we got into the weeds, that became too unwieldy. So we were thinking, how can we keep a cooperative model to the way we govern these funds? And so we decided on a model where once you are funded by us, you can opt into voting membership, which makes you a member of the board. And from that, every fall in October, we have steering committee elections where people who are voting members can nominate themselves or other voting members to serve on the steering committee that works most closely with me. They also help develop our funding initiatives. And so, as I mentioned earlier, the 2022 floods happened across eastern Kentucky, southwestern Virginia, and all of our members were mobilized and on the front lines, leveraging relationships, cooking out of their homes for those whose houses weren't lost. And so we came together as a steering committee and was like, how can we figure out how to support our members in the broader communities we serve? And so we came up with our Radical Rest grants, and the Radical Rest grants were automatic payments, no reporting, in the amount of $2,000. And the thing that we chose to do also was invite folks to re-grant it if they weren't directly affected and in need. So we had equity criteria that if this, then this, to help people come to those decisions. And almost all of our Radical Rest grantees gave a portion of their $2,000 to someone else in their community, paying it forward. And so that was the entry point into us doing some kind of direct payment. And again, funders love like all the reports and stuff. And so that was important for us not to go that route. And so then we were approached by Creatives Rebuild New York, shout out to them, to be one of their educational partners. And so we did these online educational opportunities about what guaranteed income is and how that could support artist communities. And from those 2 things, our voting members and our broader community really voiced a need for this kind of program. And so we haven't quite figured out how to do it at the scale that we would like to, but this year our steering committee has brought up, rather pushed me gently, not so gently, around bringing that Radical Rest program back and how impactful it was to folks. And so we're currently exploring that, but that's been our kind of journey into guaranteed income.
A follow-up question about this building new champions, building support in your communities is, have you found that younger generations in your communities are more amenable to thinking about guaranteed income or more accepting of it kind of in the beginning? I'm curious about whether there was a more take-up among younger people. We can start with Travis.
Yeah, in some ways I think the older generation, whether it's real or perceived, consider themselves more stable. They've lived their life, and they're based upon their circumstances, whether it be good or bad. They're not looking for new opportunities as much. But the younger generation, however, is looking for new innovative ideas. I think they are more open. In fact, we discussed the change in industry in rural communities, and particularly in southern West Virginia, we see it every single day. So I think young people are realizing that the economy, the industry that supported their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents for generations is probably not going to support them, and certainly not in the same way, them or their children. So moving forward, so I think that there's a bit of a desperation there. So cash, I think, helps support that transition period. Maybe they need a change. Maybe they need to realize that it's okay to make that bold move. If you always do what you always did, you're always going to get what you always got. And so you have that mindset that I think is supportive for young people. And another factor there, I think, is the mental health piece. To think through that the opportunities really are endless, and that it gives a level of hope. We say all the time that at CASE that we embody the spirit of hope so that we can improve our community. And so I think it's critical that we give that opportunity. Cash allows that transition period, but in order to make bold decisions, and it is a bold decision to move from one industry to another, to make these massive lifestyle changes that are very much a necessity. So cash, I think, supports that and helps to solidify the level of hope that they need.
Yeah. And Phil, how about you? Do you see a difference in generations?
Well, our generational situation is, I think, similar to what you have, but we might be a little behind you in the thinking. We have, in this part of the Wisconsin, people moving away to the cities in droves. Hardly anyone stays. And so that's creating a real, that makes it really tough on everything. The schools, the hospitals, finding help in companies. There's also a lot of agriculture there, and you don't have to have me make a long list of the problems agriculture has right now. I mean, they're getting clobbered right now. And so what dynamic I'm concerned about is this. We have a lot of people moving in that are in retirement age into the housing that was made available, that's not being used by the younger people that are moving away. And how we build a coalition between those people and the people that are already there, I think is going to be a really interesting challenge, and that's a work in progress. A 10-step project we're on step 1. And so that's one that I don't have an easy answer to.
Yeah, I'm sure that's really typical across a lot of rural areas as well. And so we'll be happy to see what happens.
And it insanely drives up the price of housing. I mean, beyond anything you can imagine.
Yeah. And how about the younger artists that you're working with, the younger folks in Tennessee?
Yeah, I want to pick up on a thread that he just mentioned about this narrative that young people need to leave. And it's such a courageous choice for young people to want to stay in their communities. And so I have seen young people be more open to guaranteed income. And, I go back and forth with my father a lot because he's like, well, son, you should be doing X, Y, and Z. And why don't you have such and such in place and this and that? And I'm like, because I graduated college right after the housing crisis. And I'm like, there's some things that are just different. And so I think we need to just be honest about that and continue to work towards these programs. And, I think one facet of rural life that I've seen have a big impact is intergenerational work. And so what we're seeing at Waymakers is it is definitely becoming more and more intergenerational across various generations, but definitely the younger people are more open for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's really longstanding as young people thinking they have to leave to have a career or to make a living, even if they don't necessarily want to. I think I would also be remiss in pointing out that a lot of this, I think, really impacts young women, especially because a lot of traditional industries like mining, farming, a lot of the things we think about in rural, that used to prop up rural areas were really closed off to them culturally, or in some cases practically. And I think about the caregiving work that women have always done in their communities, or the other opportunities that things like cash could enable, like art, or preserving old art histories, preserving crafts in a lot of these communities. That could be so empowering, especially for young people, young women especially. So I do think, obviously, cash can be really transformative, and for individuals and for communities. You've talked about the way that people pay it forward, the way it props up the people around them. But obviously, it's not a silver bullet. Nothing is. We still have an affordability crisis. We have broken markets in healthcare, housing, childcare, and other markets that people have to be able to access to live. They're critical to everything anybody would want to do, and get the protections that they deserve. So what are the things that your communities need that cash alone can't provide? And what does the movement risk getting wrong if it oversells what cash can do? Maybe, Travis, we can start with you again.
Yeah, one of the biggest pieces that we deal with every single day is West Virginia is reckoning with a severe substance abuse crisis, a situation, and then the question always is how can cash fix this, or does it make it worse on the other side? And you're dealing with that communication constantly. So here's the thing: no one wakes up in the morning and says, "I can't wait to have a substance use disorder today." That's not how it works, and unfortunately, in rural Appalachia, you have people who assume that and assume the problems here. So if we, and I believe that cash can have a critical role here, if we can go upstream and focus on the why. Why is the issue here? Why are we having a crisis? And we ask those questions, but we ask them in a proactive, strategic way. Then cash can be used to help alleviate the risk factors, I believe, that lead to that. And I believe that the research shows that. It's one of the biggest selling points of cash in southern West Virginia that I have found. It's making sure people understand the why behind it and what the expected outcomes are. So no, cash isn't going to fix it all. We do a pretty comprehensive community needs assessment within our agency every 5 years. And if you overlay that with what cash, the benefits of cash, you're going to have some struggle making some of those loopholes. And if you think through it, some of our biggest issues, we need better health care. We need better opportunities for young people, entertainment, opportunities to serve. We need public transportation. We need skill building, vocational style training for adults. So if you think about that, how does cash fit into that? It's not going to be an immediate fix to everything, but here's what cash can do, and I've said it multiple times today, and I shout it from the rooftops all the time, is cash brings the hope that we need to get to the next step. Cash may be point A, but there's a point B and a point C, but you're not going to get to point B if you don't take care of point A. No one's going to wake up in the morning and say, you know what, I am a changed person, and I'm going to change, without some type of stimulus that helps them get to that mindset. And cash, along with other things, but cash can do that, and we're thankful for that. It gives people the opportunity to sit back and breathe for a minute and say, I realize I have these issues. I have them dealing with these life circumstances, whether they're my fault or not, and I have to deal with them. And cash gives the opportunity to allow someone to breathe a little bit, and then we start to see better health outcomes. We start to see better financial outcomes. We start to see better housing outcomes. And what I really like about cash is it's a spiral effect. Once one thing enhances, then it affects another positively, and another and another. So I think that certainly cash will leverage households into a projection of long-term success, and that's what we're most excited about.
Yeah. Joe, how about your communities in Appalachia? What other things do they need guaranteed that cash can't necessarily handle?
Yeah, so I think at a basic level, and we try to do this both on the grant side, and we're toying with this revolving loan fund, is education about how the economy works, because I think a lot of that, particularly in artist communities, is like knowledge that is withheld and kept from them. And so I think, yes, cash is great, but how it works, how it can be maximized, and all of those things I think are like the second step that I've seen a lot of people yearning for, is that education around how the systems work that they know affect their lives, but maybe don't know intimately the mechanisms of how it works. And so that education piece, I think, is going to be crucial as well.
Yeah. And Phil, how about in Wisconsin?
So we had a really interesting question that we had to answer. As our group was looking at the possibilities of which entities to support, child care came up. Child care this is beyond the desert in the area that we're in. And so it would be logical to think, is there a way we could help with child care? We also know that the care for the senior people is really challenging. So we made a strategic decision. And one of the parameters that goes into my decision making is I want to make sure the first try on cash assistance is that we make it a winning program. We don't find ourselves in the crossfire of county boards or things like that. So we applied our 80% consensus that I described before, and elder care came across probably, I'm pretty sure, unanimously, and child care didn't make the cut on that 80%. And remember, my 80% was taken back to those pillars. And we did this without arguing. We had long discussions. But the point that I want to make is that we've embedded our values into this, but we're also keeping in the back of our minds a program that we're almost positive we can operate successfully. We don't want to run into political challenges. Well, and I'm very supportive of child care. I'm actually on the board of directors, and so is Blake, of a big child care organization that's in Madison. But we wanted to have a program we're pretty sure we can make work.
Yeah. I think of healthcare, childcare, and those are infrastructures that communities need to enable people to do the kind of work or the kind of things that they want to do. And having written a book in rural America, I can tell you we shouldn't forget about the need for broadband in rural America and the need for lots of other infrastructure fixes, because it's kind of another draining thing that if you're worried about. You talked about cash as kind of like stabilizing and enabling people to think more about that. Have you found that people, when they deal with the things that cash can deal with, are they like, well, let's solve other problems now, or are they able to look at that yet?
Yeah, we're very young in the process,
Mm-hmm.
but what our hopes are that the recipients will understand the value of the opportunity that they do have. Mm-hmm. And I'm very thankful that Give Directly is working with us to also provide financial literacy workshops and other opportunities for growth and development, because I believe cash does truly change mindsets, and it puts people on a trajectory that they never thought they would have the opportunity for, in a very, very positive way. And how exciting that is that just a simple cash gift can have such incredible lasting impact, not only for that individual, but their entire family and for generations to come. You know, problems do not happen overnight, and normally neither do solutions. Mm-hmm. So as we go through this process, it's really exciting to see exactly how this will play out, but very hopeful that the opportunity of cash will leverage those next pieces.
That's great. I wanted to ask next, like, what kind of skepticism, who are the skeptics you've encountered, and how have you overcome it? And what do you think that tells us about our ability to overcome skepticism in the future and keep building the coalition? And we'll start with Joe again.
I think in Central Appalachia, there's a heavy belief in the work hard, you'll get what you need narrative. And I think as things are in what seems the various states of collapse, people are coming around. And so I think the counter narrative to that, I think, is important, especially in rural places, and changing how people think about, I don't want to take a handout, and the reframe that needs to happen around that. And so I found that challenging that narrative kind of brings them around, but it's also a question of how do you combat that narrative at scale, because it's such ingrained in all of us that I think about that a lot, and how artists can be a part of challenging that narrative.
That's a really old ingrained narrative, as you said. And just to follow up on a previous question we had, are you finding young people more open to that idea of framing it?
Yeah, absolutely, because they're showing that innovation that oftentimes comes from not having the things that you need. And so I think that young people are definitely at the forefront of the creative community, at least, in challenging that and showing the new possibilities if they just had those basic needs met.
Yeah, and Phil, how about you? What kind of skepticism have you overcome?
So ours was at a more practical level. Remember, we had this committee, and one of the members of the committee, or several of them, raised the concern if we provide cash to help with taking care of the elderly person, does that mean the person that's receiving this cash assistance will then quit their job? And there's a huge labor shortage in this same territory. There's one large employer and some small employers, plus the farms. And the concern was that the cash assistance may cause people to quit their job. And so we've been very careful on how we're explaining that part of it. And I'm going to read this part. For the businesses, we're very concerned whether a cash program might reduce the availability of workers. As we now communicate, we're very careful to explain this is not to replace a job, but to help provide assistance in a way that will benefit the entire community by providing local care for the elderly.
Yeah, that's interesting. Travis, how about you?
Yeah, I think if we want to talk about skeptics, we need to define what a skeptic is. And in my opinion, a skeptic is someone who just doesn't trust it. And most often, they don't trust it because they don't understand it. We get the obvious questions all of the time. What strings are attached to it? What do I have to do? Do I have to pay it back? What are my implications this year, 5 years down the road? Is this going to pop up 10 years later? And then you have those who say, make them work for it mindset. So you have all of those extreme levels of mindsets. And the bottom line is people often just do not understand the program. So they've not heard of it. It takes conversation. It takes making sure people understand the benefits. And we've seen a lot of success working with the public school system. People very often trust their child's teacher.
Yeah.
So if you can educate them on the value and they get it, then they will share that. We've had a lot of success working in the faith-based community. People will trust their pastor or their faith leader. We've had a lot of success just knocking on doors, making sure neighbors talk to neighbors in a positive way, making sure that they have the educational components, make sure they have the resources they need, and pretty soon that begins to spread pretty rapidly. So skeptics, in my experience, only become supporters once they have a true understanding of the program. And at that point, I think it's very difficult to move a skeptic to a celebrant, but it's possible, and we're seeing it every day.
Yeah, thinking about what Phil said, I report among communities around the country, and people like to work. People like the idea of working. They just want their work to have meaning and to be important and to have value. And I think about that a lot when I was writing a book in my hometown in Arkansas is what could not worrying about money, because there were so many people living in poverty or struggling with poverty, what could money do for them? What art could it create? What other books could be written? What other storytelling could be done? What other kinds of art could be made? And I'm wondering, just as kind of a last question, what the communities that you're working in, what are you hoping this enables? What do you think this community could do if all of its, basic needs were met? And we'll start with Joe again.
I think one of our greatest gifts is the imagination. And so I'm hoping that people can unlock their imaginations and dream again and that unlocks this new world that's waiting to be created.
Yeah, how about you, Travis?
When people are happy and they have a safe place to live, when they have a support network, when they have educational and industry opportunities, when the opportunities are there, when they have what they feel to be a support network around them, the opportunities are endless because worry is less, mental health is healthier, and we're on the right track. So the opportunities are absolutely endless, and how that value transcends to the community based upon economy and health factors and financial mobility is critical here. I think if you look at your big picture, I don't think that there's a single component of our communities that a cash program cannot successfully and positively impact.
Mm-hmm. And Phil?
So I'll second everything that's been said before me here. And I really hope that we can have success with our program to use it as an example of how this can be done in other rural communities, because we have many communities that would benefit from this type of work. But we also have political opposition. It was mentioned last night, the state of Texas had the big fight. In Wisconsin, the last 2 cycles of the legislature, they've passed legislation banning our work, but the governor's vetoed it. But we got another governor election coming up, and so we're watching that really close. I want to have an opportunity where these communities can start to thrive, where the young people will want to stay, and where we have a place that's a really desirable place to raise our kids.
Yeah. I think we're almost done. One last question. You mentioned the political opposition, and we have seen bans try to take hold in Wisconsin, Tennessee, and West Virginia, where you're all from, unsuccessfully. And we've also seen repeals of these bans and efforts to enable people to enact these kinds of programs if they want. And what does that say about the political moment in places where this kind of movement has historically written off rural areas, conservative states, or states that may not be as amenable to these things politically? Phil, we'll start with you.
Okay, so I was careful not to introduce politics here. One of the things that, when you're watching the Wisconsin election results, remember the following. You have these 2 big cities, Madison and Milwaukee. Milwaukee, about twice the size of Madison, and they are carrying the Democratic vote. But what you don't realize is that there's actually twice as many other Democratic voters outside those 2 urban areas as there are inside. And I think we really have to figure out ways to make sure we reach everybody. It's the young people, and it's also these new people that are moving in and trying to figure out how to build a coalition across all of these. And the rural voter is always going to be conservative no matter what party they're in. And the kinds of issues you just made, well, you know, why don't they get a job and all of that. We have to make it clear that we're going to have a successful society. We're going to have things that help certain people at certain times, so that they can get their feet under them and move ahead.
Yeah, and small c conservative, I think we will clarify. Yeah. And Travis, how about you?
When decision makers avail themselves to independent thought, education is key. And that's why I'm so glad that so many of these projects have such a strong research component. Please keep doing the research. Please keep expressing the value behind it. Help us to understand the why. Help us to be able to show multiple spectrums of the successes and what that looks like. What does that ripple effect truly feel like? And not just the recipients, but the entire community, to see the positive changes. And I think once people see the successes, it's undeniable, and we'll see much more success long term.
Yeah. And Joe?
Ooh, it's a lot going on in my home state that makes all of this complicated. But I think the hope is in the organizers that are continuing to do the door-to-door, person-to-person work. Because if you've been following the news recently, our state legislature is trying to take away the only majority Black Democrat voting district since the Supreme Court ruling. And so I think we are just going to have to both do that organizing so that we can do the organizing to change the things that we want those officials to address. So it's a special, special time in the state of Tennessee.
And I think also what you're all talking about is making sure rural areas have a voice, making sure they have access to programs and building champions for what could be instead of just what is. And I think you're all doing that. And so thank you so much for your work. And thanks everyone for joining us. Are we doing questions? I don't think so. Yeah, no. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I think that's it then. Yeah. Thanks everyone. Thank you. Thank you all so much.